Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video we're going to learn the 2 to 4 player Clank Catacombs, designed by Paul Denon and published by Direwolf Digital, who helped sponsor this video. Based on the original best-selling Clank game of 2016, this is a new standalone version with several unique twists that'll have you competing to steal the most treasures hidden in a skeletal dragon's dungeon. Time is running out, and so are your chances of surviving. So join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, put this Clank board to the side of the play area with this dragon marker on the space of this rage track showing your number of players. In this video, we'll assume we have 2. Now find and separate the pile of square tiles by their backs and shuffle them separately. The ones with blue backs are known as the depths tiles, but from the others, pick 2 at random to return to the box unseen, stacking the rest on top of the depths. Nearby, also set these gold and lockpick tokens, along with these major and minor secrets and prisoner tokens. These 3 sets should be mixed separately into their own piles face down, and I'm keeping all of these in some trays that I have to help organize them. Now find the 7 artifact tokens, which have this shape. And you'll notice they have values printed on them, and you'll stack these tokens so that they go in order with the lowest on top and the highest on the bottom. This is the dragon bag, and you'll drop these 24 black dragon cubes into it, keeping the 5 white ghost cubes nearby. Here we have the market board, and on it you place these 2 backpack tokens, 2 blood amulets, 3 burglar kits, and these crowns with the 8 on bottom and then the 9 and 10 stacked on top. All of these items that we've set out here are in an area referred to as the bank. And I should mention, if you ever run out of gold or lockpick tokens while playing, you can just use a suitable replacement. These are not meant to run out. In the center of the play area, lay out this starting tile with either of its sides face up. And this will show a crypt, some rooms, and various paths. On the starting tile, you'll find this room known as the Monkey Shrine, where you'll place these 3 monkey idols. Then, by the crypt, also add a number of these mastery tiles equal to your number of players, returning any extras back to the box. We now need to organize the cards, which might seem tricky at first since they all have the same backs, but we can distinguish them by the banners they have at their tops, and we'll start with the yellow ones. These come in 3 stacks of matching cards. There are Mercenary, Explore, and Secret Tomes. Leave each face up in an area within reach of the players, known as the Reserve, with this single goblin set beside them. Now set aside any with a gray banner at the top, shuffling the rest into a face-down dungeon deck and dealing 6 cards face up beside it into a row. As you do this, keep an eye out for any cards that show this dragon attack symbol and set them aside, drawing replacements until there are no dragon attacks in the row. Then shuffle all of those replaced cards back into the dungeon deck. At this time, check to see if any of the revealed cards have an arrive effect printed in this area. If so, they're resolved now just once as they first enter the dungeon row. In this case, we're told to put 3 dragon cubes back into the bag, but they're all in the bag already, so we don't have to do anything. Now have every person take 30 Clank cubes and a pawn in the color of their choice, returning any unused colors back to the box. Also have everyone take 3 lockpick tokens from the bank. Then each person adds their pawn to this Crypt Space of the start tile. From the gray bannered cards we'd set aside earlier, each person now takes 6 burgles, 2 stumbles, 1 sidestep, and 1 scramble. They now shuffle these cards into their own personal face-down deck, and then draw an opening hand of 5 cards. Now make the sneakiest person the first player, or choose someone randomly, and have them add 3 of their cubes to this Clank area of the board. And the second player adds 2. If we had a third player, they'd add 1, and a fourth player adds nothing. And that's the setup. In Clank Catacombs, each person is looking to gain the most treasure from the dungeon, but in order to leave, you must bring back a special type of treasure known as an artifact. Have the most treasure by the end of the game, and you win, earning the title of Greatest Thief in the Realm. For even more variety, there's a Direwolf Game Room Companion app that provides new ways to experience your copy of the game, and I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video. Clank Catacombs is played over a series of turns, starting with the first player and going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, the main requirement is that you must play all of the cards in your hand in any order that you choose. As they're played, keep them face up in what is known as the play area in front of you, where they'll stay until the end of your turn. Many cards provide you with resources which are the symbols shown in their top left-hand corners, and there are three main types. Skill, which is shown in a blue diamond, swords, which are in a red circle, and boots, which are the yellow squares. You always play cards in your hand for free. And when they provide you with resource symbols, imagine those resources pooling together into a bank of resources you can split up in any way you like across the actions you want to perform with them, taking each action as many times as you can afford and want to. We'll learn about the various actions in a moment, but just know you can wait to take actions after all of your cards are played, or just play a few cards and then take some actions and play more cards after, adding more resources to your pool to take further actions with them, and so on. Just remember, you must play all of the cards in your hand by the end of your turn. For example, if I played these cards from my hand, I've generated 4 skill and 1 boot. But let's learn how to spend skill first. At any point during my turn, I can spend skill I've generated to acquire any combination of cards from the reserve deck that have this yellow banner, and any cards from the dungeon row with a blue banner. The cost to buy a card is in its lower right-hand corner, so I could buy this Lion Weight for 3, and with the leftover skill point also buy this Rebel Scribe, or some other combination of cards. Or I could choose to buy nothing at all. Skill points don't have to be spent, but any you don't spend by the end of your turn are lost. Now, at this point, we don't know enough rules to understand why you might want one card over another, but just be aware that each card has special abilities you'll be able to use later. If you do acquire any cards by spending skill points, put them directly into a face-up personal discard pile you'll keep near you, but don't resolve anything on them. As we'll see later, when, and only when, you need to draw a card while your deck is empty, you will reshuffle your discard pile into a new face-down deck, and then you'll keep drawing as many cards as you're owed. In this way, cards you bought earlier will eventually end up in your hand to use on a future turn, and when played at that time, you get to resolve their printed effects, which we'll learn about later. I had said that you don't resolve a card's ability after buying it, but if it has an acquire box, at the moment you purchase it, you must resolve any effect inside it, but only once at the time it's purchased. If you play, for example, this card later, you would ignore its acquire effect. And that's how you use the skill resource to acquire blue or yellow bannered cards. But now let's see how you can use them on a card in the dungeon row that has a purple banner. These are known as devices. When you pay its skill point cost, don't add it to your discard pile. Instead, immediately resolve its use effect here and then put it into a shared dungeon discard pile beside the dungeon deck. This action is known as using a device. And that covers spending skill points. So now let's see how the sword resource is spent. Sometimes you'll find cards in the dungeon row or reserve with a red banner like this Keymaster or Goblin. These are monsters, and they'll show the number of sword symbols you must spend to defeat them in this bottom right-hand corner. Your deck won't start with any cards that generate swords, so let's pretend it's a few turns later and you had previously acquired this sneak attack card from the dungeon row. It generates 3 sword symbols for you to spend. You could assign 2 of them to defeat this goblin, and that would leave you with a leftover sword to use later. When a monster is defeated, gain the reward it shows here. In this case, we see a gold symbol, which means we collect that amount from the supply. Gold is worth points at the end of the game and can also be used in other ways, as we'll see later. A defeated goblin is never removed from play. It stays in the reserve and represents the numerous goblins always nearby, so it can be attacked multiple times, even during the same turn. But if you defeat a monster in the dungeon row, after claiming its reward, move it to the discard pile. And I should mention, any cards removed from the dungeon row either by spending skill or using swords, they're not replaced. Leave those spaces empty. With that, we've covered spending skill and swords. So now let's learn about using the boots resource. A boot typically allows you to move your pawn from where it is through one tunnel to a new room. And rooms are the open square, rectangular, or large circle spaces, and tunnels are the white paths that connect them. So if I had 3 boots, I could use one to move from the crypt into this room, and then through this tunnel into the large circle space. This would leave 1 boot left over, but like skills and swords, you're never required to use boots you gain. but any leftovers you don't use by the end of your turn are lost. A large circle space like this is known as a crystal cave. And when you enter one of these, you become exhausted by their maze-like passages and cannot use any more boot symbols for the rest of your turn. Now, that's going to limit the examples I can share with you, so let's pretend it's now our next turn. If you start your turn in a crystal cave, you can freely move out of it using a boot symbol. So let's do that and go in this direction. Now, anytime a path leads to the edge of a dungeon with no adjacent tile, commit to the path by setting your pawn on the tunnel you've chosen, and then draw the top tile from the stack beside the board, setting it beside the tile you're leaving. Now, tiles can only be added to an empty space, but they may be rotated in any way you like, as long as one full edge is adjacent to the full edge of the tile you're moving from. In other words, I couldn't set it here like this. It would have to be like this. When setting tiles beside the start tile on this side, treat it as two separate tiles. So a tile placed on this side can never be set here because it's between the two tiles. It would have to either go here or here. Going back to our other example, after completing a tunnel you began moving on, continue moving to the connected space. If the entire stack of tiles ever runs out during the game, then it becomes impossible to discover new tiles, and players can no longer move along paths that just lead to open edges. Now, to help understand the remaining rules for movement, I'm going to add several tiles to the dungeon to help create some examples. Some tunnels have special rules. To move through ones with this symbol, you must spend 2 boots instead of just 1. When moving through a tunnel showing these monster symbols, you must take 1 damage for each of them, but you can take 1 less damage for this for each sword symbol you choose to spend. For each damage you take, if any, put a cube from your personal supply onto the leftmost empty space of your matching colored health meter here on the board. And note, you cannot choose to go through a tunnel if its damage would fill in the final space of your meter. Tunnels showing one of these lock symbols cannot be crossed unless you spend a lockpick token from your supply to cover it. This tunnel is now unlocked, and neither you or your opponents will have to spend a lockpick to cross it from now on. Sometimes a tunnel is shaped like an arrow, which means you can only move through it in that direction. So we couldn't go back this way, for example. That said, there is one exception. Occasionally, you might play a card that provides you with an ability to teleport to an adjacent room, like we see here. And adjacent rooms are any connected by a tunnel. And when teleporting, you ignore all usual movement restrictions. If there's a monster on the tunnel, ignore it. If there's a lock, ignore it. If you normally can't move in that direction because of an arrow, ignore it. You can also use a teleport to leave a crystal cave you entered that turn. Remember, when entering these, you can no longer use boots for the rest of your turn. But I could play this teleport to move to an adjacent room. Just know I still can't use any more boot symbols to move further this turn. You can also use a teleport to go into an undiscovered adjacent room. Perhaps I'll teleport in this direction. To do that, I'd draw a tile and rotate it as usual, and then I'd put it in place and go to the connected room, ignoring any costs in between, as you normally do with a teleport. Speaking of which, when moving normally to discover a new tile, the way you attach it could cause you to have a cost to finish traveling that tunnel. For example, now I have to pick this lock. But what if I don't have any lock picks left? Well, I must pay this even if it means pausing the move to take another action. For example, maybe there's a monster I can fight in the dungeon row that would give me a lockpick for use here. But if I have no way of paying the required cost to finish the move, then I must instead rotate the tile differently to create a path that I can travel on. Sometimes a tunnel ends at one of these portal symbols. If so, don't stop there, but instead immediately move your pawn to any other portal on any tile in the dungeon. And when you exit that portal, finish the movement by following the connected tunnel to the next room. So just to be clear, by spending 1 boot, I might go from here to here, then bounce over to this portal and finish in this room. Now, some portals might have additional costs showing on the tunnels connecting them, and if so, you must pay those costs as normal as you pass through those tunnels. Unless, of course, you are using that teleport effect that we discussed earlier. You treat any room connected by a portal as adjacent to any other room connected by a portal, ignoring the costs on paths between them since you're using a teleport to travel. With that, we've covered the rules for movement. So now let's discuss the different rooms you might enter and the actions you can take inside them.
Some rooms will have a locked feature which shows a dashed outline and one of 3 possible symbols inside. Well, in one of these rooms, you can take the lockpick action by spending a lockpick from your supply to resolve the effect of the icon. You then place the lockpick over the icon to indicate it cannot be picked again during the game. So let's see how each icon is resolved, starting with this chest. This gains you a random major secret from the bank, which you reveal and resolve. And you'll find each major secret explained on this included token reference, so refer to it when playing. If you lockpick an icon with a library symbol, immediately take a secret tome from the reserve for free and add it to your discard pile. These secret tomes have no benefit when drawn and played, but this symbol is the symbol for victory points, and every card you have will be worth the points showing in this corner at the end of the game. If you lockpick one of these prisons, immediately gain 2 prisoner tokens and add them face up to your personal supply. Each prisoner can provide you with points at the end of the game if you fulfill their conditions, which are explained on the token reference guide. But whether it's a chest, library, or prison, you can only pick those locks if there's a related token or card to collect. Once they run out, no player can take that related action. Some rooms will give you a reward each time you enter them, but you can only gain the reward once per turn. That said, on a future turn, if you re-enter that room, you'll gain its reward again. For example, entering this space earns you 1 gold from the bank. Well, this symbol represents a minor secret, which you randomly take from the bank, reveal, and resolve. And again, you'll find the rules for these symbols on the token reference. After resolving one of these tokens, you then remove it from the game. And when the bank has none of these tokens left, there is no reward for entering one of these rooms in the future. If you enter the Monkey Shrine, take any one monkey idol for your personal supply, which is worth 5 points at the end of the game. If the space shows a heart, when you enter it, heal 1 damage. Anytime you heal damage, return the rightmost cube on your health track here back to your personal supply. This space is known as a Wayshrine. While here, you can mark it during your turn by adding a cube from your supply to one of its 4 corners. And then you gain a gold for every Wayshrine you've marked in the dungeon. So right now, I just gain 1 gold. Now, if I marked this Wayshrine later, I've now marked 2 of them, so I'd gain 2 gold. At most, each player can only add 1 of their cubes to each Wayshrine, and if you ever have no cubes left, you can't mark any more of them. Now let's talk about artifact rooms, which have this symbol on them. When a tile is added to the dungeon with one of these rooms, immediately add the top token from this artifact stack onto it. Some of these rooms will show a plus symbol, and instead of taking the top token, take one space lower down from the stack for each of those plus symbols. So that means when adding this room with 2 pluses, we would go 1, 2 down, then add the token, putting the rest back on top. If you ever have more plus symbols than there are tokens below the top of the stack, just add the lowest token that remains. Also, if you reveal an artifact room and there are no artifacts left in the bank, just leave that room empty. Either way, on a player's turn, if they're in an artifact room, they can choose to perform the Take an Artifact action, collecting it from the space and adding it to their personal supply. After taking an artifact, this arrow symbol here reminds you to move the dragon marker up 1 space along its rage track. Some other tokens, like this minor secret, also show the rage symbol, and when collected, they increase the rage as well, and we'll see how rage affects things a little later.
Just keep in mind, you never have to collect an artifact in your room, and you may not want to, because after taking an artifact, you can't take another one, or exchange the one you have for a different artifact later.
And notice the artifacts at the top of the stack aren't as valuable as the ones that will be added to the dungeon later.
So, do you take the first artifact you see, or keep going deeper into the dungeon hoping to find a better one?
Collecting an artifact is also the only way you can come back to this crypt space and escape, as we'll see. For now, though, let's look at this market space. While on one of these, you can buy as many items from this market board as you like in a single turn at a cost of 7 gold each. And the benefit of each of them is once again found on the token reference sheet. And that brings us to the last thing we need to discuss with these tiles, haunted ones. These will have a ghost icon floating on them, and when added to the dungeon, immediately add a ghost cube from the bank to this Clank area of the board to be dealt with later.
And with that, we've covered all the action symbols on cards you might play and the ways in which you can move around the board to interact with the various rooms. However, the cards you play during your turn won't just provide you with symbols to spend, they may have other effects as well. These are printed in this area and must be resolved during your turn. But just like the symbols that get generated by cards, you can resolve card effects in any order. For example, Rebel General says that if you have another companion in your play area, you draw a card. If I had these cards in play, the General's effect wouldn't resolve since I don't have another companion in play. But if I then added this later during my turn, which is a companion, I can come back to this effect and resolve it, drawing a card. Now while we're here, I should also point out, some cards like this one will instruct you to add Clank. This means you take a cube from your personal supply and add it here to the Clank board. Clank is bad, as we'll see, but if your cube supply is ever empty, ignore instructions to add more Clank to your board. Other cards might tell you to remove Clank. If so, return cubes of your color from the Clank area back to your supply. Now again, remember, any effects on cards can still resolve later. So let's say I had just played this card, which tells me to remove 2 Clank, but I only had 1 on the board. I'd remove it, but then if later during the same turn, something caused me to add 1 Clank here, I could still resolve the leftover -1 Clank from this card to remove the one I just added. When your turn ends, any effects you didn't fully resolve are lost, but until then, you can resolve any leftover effects you have at any time they would apply during that turn. When an effect lets you draw cards, remember these are always taken from your personal deck, not the dungeon deck. If you're told to discard a card, it must be one in your hand that you haven't played yet. This can be a good way to get rid of cards with negative effects that might add Clank before you're forced to play and resolve them. Also keep in mind, if an effect tells you to discard something in order to gain something else, like we see in this example, you must perform the discard to gain the related outcome. Some cards or tokens can cause you to trash a card. To do this, you return the indicated card back to the game box. Trashing is a great way to get weaker cards out of your deck, so you're more likely to draw better ones in the future. Sometimes an effect will instruct each player to do something. Now, most of the time, it won't matter what order the players do this something in, but in the cases where it does, always start with the person taking their turn and then go clockwise around the table. We're not going to go over every card that comes in the game as how they work is written on them, but you should know enough now to be able to interpret any that you come across. After playing and resolving all of your cards and taking any actions you can or wish to, you now declare the end of your turn and follow 3 steps. First, put all of the cards you played into your discard pile and then draw 5 new cards from your personal deck to prepare for your next turn. At this point, our draw deck is empty, but remember, you only reshuffle your discard pile into a new deck when you would need to draw cards and there aren't any there. Well, in this case, we were able to draw exactly what we needed and didn't run out, so we are fine. We don't reshuffle anything. However, the next time we need to draw a card, well, we won't be able to. And at that point, we'll then reshuffle our discard pile into a new deck and continue drawing what we're owed. Next, if any of the 6 spaces of the dungeon row are empty, refill them with new cards from the dungeon deck. If any added have this arrive effect, they should be resolved. And then check to see if any of the cards that were just added to the row show this dragon symbol. If so, the dragon now attacks a single time, even if several came out. Also, only new dragon symbols just drawn at the end of a player's turn can cause a dragon to attack. Any that remain in a row from a previous turn do not cause an attack. So in other words, if this card was still in the row at the end of the next player's turn, it wouldn't automatically trigger a dragon attack. Only if that player drew a new dragon to add to the row. To resolve an attack, add all of the cubes on this Clank area of the board to the bag, mixing them in, and then draw a number of cubes from the bag equal to the number of cubes shown on the dragon marker's current space. Also draw 1 more for each card in the dungeon row that shows this danger banner here. So in this case, we would draw 1, 2, 3,
plus one more for a total of 4 cubes. So let's draw those out now, and depending on what we get, we'll resolve each cube in a certain way. Any black cubes drawn are just set aside. They will not be returned to the bag. If a player's colored cube is drawn, add it as damage to the related player's health track. Whenever a ghost cube is pulled, every player takes 1 damage by taking a cube from their personal supply and adding it to their health track. Once the attack is over, all ghost cubes that were drawn are put back in this Clank area, so they'll be added back to the bag when the dragon attacks next. Now, if a ghost cube is ever pulled, and a player has no more cubes left in their personal supply to take as damage, they should use a black cube that had been previously pulled from the bag as a replacement. So when you run out of cubes in your personal supply, ghost damage and damage that comes from the bag will still have to be applied to your health track. But when you run out of cubes, any damage that comes from any other source is just ignored. Also, you can never voluntarily take damage if you don't have enough cubes to assign to your health track. For example, I couldn't choose to move along this path if I didn't have any swords because this would require taking 2 damage, and I only have 1 cube left. You also can't voluntarily take damage if doing so would fill in your health meter. After refilling the dungeon row and resolving a dragon attack, if any, the next player in clockwise order takes their turn. While taking a turn, if a player had previously collected an artifact, then they're allowed to return to this Crypt Space, and if they do so, they've exited the dungeon. They should finish taking their turn, but before refilling the dungeon row, they remove their pawn from the board and immediately collect one of the mastery tokens from here, which will be worth 20 points. Instead of escaping with an artifact, if your health meter is ever completely filled with cubes, you're knocked out, and you lay your pawn down. Now in this video, our pawns have been laying down the whole time, but normally they'd be upright. So when you're knocked out, you lay them flat like this on the board. Now if this happens while you're on a blue tile known as one of the depths, no matter what you've collected so far, your final score will be 0 points. On the other hand, if you're knocked out while on one of these pink tiles, as long as you've collected an artifact, you will still score points when the game is over. Once a player has left the dungeon by arriving at the crypt with an artifact, or if they're knocked out, then from that point on, they'll ignore cards that affect all players. They also no longer add Clank to the board, and they ignore the effects of dragon attacks. If their cubes are later drawn from the bag, treat them like black cubes, just setting them aside. When you get to the turn of a player who escaped or has been knocked out, they no longer take a regular turn and instead just draw and resolve 4 cubes from the bag. Or if you have a game with just 2 players, they draw 6 cubes from the bag. In this way, after players begin leaving the dungeon or get knocked out, it gets more dangerous for the players still inside. They'll now want to grab an artifact and get out quickly so they aren't knocked out before at least reaching a pink tile. As soon as all players are either out of the dungeon or knocked out, the game ends. Also, if there is ever not enough cards in the dungeon deck to refill its row to 6 cards at the end of a player's turn, or if the bag is ever empty after resolving an attack, all players still in the dungeon are knocked out, which also ends the game. Either way, all players who escaped or were knocked out but made it to a pink tile with an artifact will now calculate their final scores. First, they'll add together all points within green gem symbols found on artifacts and other tokens they might have acquired. They'll also gather all of the cards in their hand, deck, and discard pile and gain any points showing in their top right-hand corners. Then they add the value of all gold tokens they collected, and the player with the most points wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player with the most valuable artifact wins. If you're interested in playing Clank Catacombs using the Adventuring Party expansion, which lets you add a 5th or 6th player, you'll find details for how to do that here at the back of the rulebook, which I'll leave for you to discover on your own. But otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Clank Catacombs. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time,
Thanks for watching.